Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we'll be shooting at several 5-gallon water jugs like the one you see here from a distance of 300 yards to help us to determine if it is worth it or not to upgrade from a 6.5 Creedmoor to a 6.5 PRC. Keep in mind that all of the water jugs are completely full, but they may not always appear that way depending on how the sunlight hits them. The cartridge on the left is a 6.5 Creedmoor 147 grain ELD match by Hornady, and the cartridge on the right is a 6.5 PRC 147 grain ELD match, also by Hornady. While it is true that they are equipped with the identical bullet on top, their performance is very different due to the fact that the powder charge for each is very different. Oh sure, the 6.5 PRC looks like it may be the better performer, but there is always a trade-off, and it begs the question, better perhaps, but at what price? From left to right, you are looking at the 6.5 Creedmoor in 120 grain ELD match, 140 grain ELD match, the 147 grain ELD, and lastly the 6.5 PRC 147 grain ELD match. When you strip it all away, you now see the bullets by themselves. From left to right once again is the 120 grain, the 140 grain, and both of the 147s. To help us gather a well-rounded idea of the performance capabilities of the 6.5 Creedmoor, we will be shooting all three of these Creedmoor rounds today. In a moment, we will definitely be shooting the water jugs. You will see footage like this and better. I would, however, like to share with you the chronograph findings, and then we'll go right back out into the field and see what happens when those numbers come to life. We'll start by comparing the numbers on the 147 grain Creedmoor next to the 147 grain PRC. Keep in mind that I have not yet purchased a 6.5 PRC, but thanks to spending some time in front of a ballistics calculator, I soon realized that we could use the 6.5 Creedmoor to simulate the 6.5 PRC performance. Here's how we will do that. I started by chronographing the 120 grain, the 140 grain, and the 147 grain in 6.5 Creedmoor, and I realized that they were all about 40 to 77 feet per second slower than what Hornady claimed. However, I was shooting a 22-inch barrel, and Hornady does their testing with a 24-inch for both the Creedmoor and the PRC. Now that certainly accounted for most of the difference in my numbers not matching Hornady. Also, even though I would opt for the 24-inch barrel in a 6.5 PRC if I were to purchase one, I figured to be consistent, I would estimate my PRC numbers as if I had used a 22-inch barrel, and therefore I used 2870 feet per second as my starting value for the PRC rather than 2910 that Hornady claims. As you can see, I had an average muzzle velocity of 2658 feet per second and 2306 foot-pounds worth of energy for the Creedmoor. Compare that to the 2870 feet per second and 2668 foot-pounds of energy for the PRC. That means that the PRC is 7.9% faster and has 15.6% more energy at the muzzle. While those numbers are substantial, it is important to consider how much more powder needed to be burned in order to make that happen. When I pulled the bullets apart, I weighed the powder charges for each and found that the 147 grain Creedmoor had 43.5 grains worth of powder, and that the PRC had 61.7 grains. That means that it takes 42% more powder to achieve 8% more speed and 15.6% more muzzle energy. We'll start the day by shooting the 147 grain Creedmoor at 300 yards. Please take a moment to notice that the 6.5 PRC numbers at 450 yards are nearly identical to the 300-yard numbers for the Creedmoor. That means that what you are about to see at 300 yards for the Creedmoor is nearly identical to the PRC performance at 450. But what happens if you want to see how the PRC would have done at 300 yards? Please take a moment to look at the 150-yard numbers for the Creedmoor and the 300-yard numbers for the PRC. Notice that we want to be close to 2,482 feet per second for the arrival speed in order to match the PRC performance. That means that I could have set my shooting table at about 150 yards out, or even moved it closer by 10 or 15 yards. But rather than moving it closer, I went slightly further back and set the table at 165 yards. I wanted to be certain to not overstate the effectiveness of the PRC. We'll start things off by shooting at this 5-gallon water jug from 300 yards using the 6.5 Creedmoor 147 grain ELD match from Hornady. Walking up right now to the water jug that was just hit at a distance of 300 yards using 6.5 Creedmoor 147 grain ELD match by Hornady. From what I can tell so far, it looks like the entire thing got lifted up about 2.5 feet off the ground, and that's at the lowest point. And again, that thing weighs about 40, maybe 41 pounds, which is roughly 19 and a half kilograms, somewhere in there. As far as shot placement, it's looking like we were about maybe 3/4 of an inch low, 1 inch low, more or less dead center with where the circle was, just a little bit low. But if I've said it before, I'll say it again. You do not have to hit perfect bullseyes with these ELD match bullets. They are a very forgiving round. Let's see what happens when we lift this thing up. Just hanging by a thread on that side, hanging by a little more than a thread on that side. So it almost got cut into 3 pieces basically. Let's see what happens when I pick this thing up. Okay, so here it is from the front side. So you can see the shot placement a little better at that point, just a little bit below the circle. Respectable enough for today's work anyway. And there we go. Next up for the 6.5 Creedmoor is the 140 grain ELD match from Hornady, in the distance 300 yards. Well, I'm walking up to the 5-gallon water jug that was just hit at a distance of 300 yards using 6.5 Creedmoor 140 grain ELD match from Hornady. Let's see what happened here. I'm pretty sure that the shot placement was respectable enough today. That is the lower half of this thing, of what's left of it. Still some water in there. And you can see that there was a handle right there. But let's not make you wait any longer. Let's see what kind of shot placement we had on this thing today. To understand the shot placement, you need to understand that there was a handle right here. Normally, we would just look at the sticker on the other side and see if I was close to the sticker. The sticker is gone. But typically, I line up that sticker with the handle that you would normally see right there. So the handle would be right about there. So my shot placement was pretty much dead center and maybe a ½ inch to the right at 300 yards is my best estimate for you. Well, I thought that that sticker was long gone, but it has turned up. It was flipped upside down in the mud. But you can see that sure enough, just as I had suspected, just a little bit to the right of dead center. Next up, we'll be shooting the 120 grain ELD match from Hornady at a distance of 300 yards. Well, I'm walking up right now to the 5-gallon water jug that was just hit at a distance of 300 yards using 6.5 Creedmoor 120 grain ELD match. I'm not sure that we had perfect shot placement or not, but it was perfect enough to blow this thing into 3 pieces, which is the first time I've seen that happen. Here is what's left of the sticker that was on it. Maybe some more of the sticker in the ground over there. It looks like we may have hit him a touch on the high side, and this is the back side of it down there. And on the back side, you can kind of see a little bit of an exit right there. So we may have hit him just a, I don't know, just a touch high. Not real bad though. Good enough shot placement to blow him sky high and blow him into 3 pieces at least. So it looks like with this particular bullet, you do not need to hit perfect bullseyes to get the job done. It's a very forgiving bullet. Well, now that I'm all packed up for the day, I went back to that mud over there and I pulled out this remaining sticker that was on the water jug that was hit with the 120 grain ELD match. Notice how that says target spot on the bottom right there, target spot on the bottom right there. Now this is the sticker from earlier in the day where we hit it with the 140 grain ELD match. I always put the stickers on in the same direction. So here's your hit from 140 grain. I'm wondering if we had a hit from the 120 grain right about there. Let me hold this in a little bit different direction. Give me a second here. You can kind of see that maybe, I mean just maybe, that could be a bullet that just kind of whizzed right through there by my thumb. Possibly, don't know. Now I've got the lower piece of the sticker from the mud replaced or patched together with the upper sticker. And it looks more and more like the bullet probably hit right about there. Still not conclusive, but it sure is looking that way. And there's your upper sticker. Just kind of fits together real nicely. We'll be shooting the 6.5 Creedmoor 147 grain ELD match, this time at a distance of 165 yards, so as to simulate the 6.5 PRC 147 grain from a distance of 300 yards. Well, I'm walking up right now to the water jug that was just hit at a distance of 165 yards using the 6.5 Creedmoor 147 grain ELD match. And again, that is so that we can simulate what we probably would have seen had we used a 6.5 PRC at 300 yards. Please remember that that was a conservative simulation. Let's take a look and see what kind of shot placement we had. I have a funny feeling it was pretty close to perfect. I'll have to look at the tape when I get home. But there's the sticker that was on the water jug. I think we may have almost touched black there. So again, pretty good shot placement with it. That's, I guess, what happens. You have better shot placement and better speed on arrival. As far as the water jug goes, this was the top half that was launched. Let's see what we got here. This was where I had the sticker, and that's pretty much a dead center hit. It doesn't get much more perfect than that for shot placement. In terms of the bottom half of this thing, really nothing to see here, not much left to see here. And as far as how high this thing went, I want you to remember that this is the most amount of wide angle I have used to date in any of these shots, attempting to finally capture the apex of flight of one of these, just in case it launched, and it did. Once again, I have failed you. I'm sorry. I'll keep working on it. This is the water jug that was going to be hit with the 6.5 Creedmoor 147 grain from 300 yards, a split second before impact. Here is your exact moment of impact, also known as frame 1. Here in frame 2, the explosion begins in earnest, and in frames 3 and 4, the water jug starts to lift off the ground. Skipping ahead to frames 10, 11, and 12, we see the full effect, and we also get a glimpse of how the PRC would perform at 450 yards. Next up are the still shots for the 6.5 Creedmoor 140 grain ELD match. Here is the exact moment of impact. Here it is again as we zoom in on it so that you can get a good look at the vacuum effect it creates. And back to the regular angle. Here in frames 2 and 3, the explosion is well underway. By frame 10, the water jug was starting to leave the picture. By frame 13, it had completely left, and it did not return to the picture until frame 34. And here are the still shots for the 120 grain ELD match. Here is the exact moment of impact, followed by frames 2 through 5. In frames 2 through 5, I couldn't pick a winner, so I thought I'd show them all to you. By frame 10, the water jug was starting to leave the picture, and by frame 12, it was pretty much gone from the picture. It did not return to sight until frame 41. Next up are the still shots of the 147 grain ELDs shot at 165 yards so that we could simulate a 6.5 PRC shot at 300. Here is the exact moment of impact. All we've done here is zoomed in on that same picture, thought it was worth a closer look. Here in frame 2, the explosion has begun without any controversy, and in frames 3 and 4, the water jug is definitely headed north. By frame 13, the water jug would begin to leave the picture, and by frame 16, it would be out of the picture, and it would not return until frame 34.